Most people will spend their entire lives saving money, and never once question whether saving is actually the mechanism that builds wealth. They were taught to accumulate, to protect, to hold, and so they do, quietly and faithfully, for decades. But King Solomon, the wealthiest man the ancient world ever recorded, embedded a warning inside his wisdom literature that almost no one stops long enough to read correctly. He observed that those who withhold carefully can still fall into lack, while those who understand how to command capital grow quietly richer without ever chasing wealth directly. Saving protects a floor. It does not build what stands above it. If this challenges something you were taught about money, stay until the end. For thousands of years, people have believed that saving money is the foundation of financial wisdom. Save more than you spend. Protect what you have. Accumulate carefully, patiently, and over time, wealth will follow. This idea has been passed down through generations. It has been written into personal finance books, spoken from pulpits, repeated at kitchen tables, and reinforced in the quiet pride of every person who watches their account balance slowly grow. And it is not entirely wrong, but it is incomplete in a way that most people never discover until it is too late. King Solomon, the wealthiest ruler of the ancient world, a man whose financial structures outlived his own lifetime, quietly embedded a warning inside his wisdom literature, a warning that most readers have passed over without fully understanding. The warning was not about spending recklessly. It was not a rebuke of caution or discipline. It was something more unsettling. Solomon observed that some people withhold carefully, accumulate diligently, preserve every coin, and still, quietly, they fall into lack, while others, who understand something different about how money moves, grow steadily richer without ever chasing wealth directly. This is the paradox that most disciplined savers never resolve. And today, that paradox deserves a careful examination. Consider a particular kind of person. He is not careless. He is not foolish with money. In fact, by almost every visible measure, he is doing everything correctly. He earns a steady income. He budgets carefully. He avoids unnecessary purchases. He contributes to savings accounts meant for security and comfort. He does not live beyond his means. 20 years pass. He is still working, still saving, still doing everything he was taught. And yet something feels wrong. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way he can easily explain to others, but in a quiet, persistent way that surfaces in unguarded moments. He is financially stable, but he is not financially powerful. His savings exist, but they do not multiply. They sit, protected, slowly losing ground to inflation. Each year, the cost of living rises slightly faster than his account balance grows. Each year, the distance between where he is and where he imagined he would be remains about the same. He did everything society recommended, and wealth never truly appeared. This is not an uncommon story. It is, in fact, the most common financial story of the disciplined modern worker. And the reason it continues to repeat generation after generation is not a lack of effort. It is a misunderstanding of mechanism. Solomon was not simply a king. He was a careful observer of economic behavior across time and culture. His observations were not recorded as investment strategies or financial formulas. They were recorded as wisdom literature, layered, compressed, and designed to reward the patient reader. In Proverbs, chapter 11 verses 24 and 25, Solomon writes something that has puzzled readers for centuries. He notes that there is one who gives freely, yet grows wealthier still, and there is one who withholds more than is right, and comes only to poverty. For most readers, this verse becomes a moral statement about generosity. But Solomon was also a structural thinker. He was not simply observing personality types. He was describing two entirely different relationships with capital. The one who gives freely is not reckless. He has structured his resources in a way that allows certain portions to move outward, toward multiplication, toward exchange, toward growth. The one who withholds excessively is not cautious. He has trapped his capital. He has confused protection with power. He has mistaken preservation for prosperity. Solomon was not condemning caution. He was revealing a deeper structural truth about how money actually behaves. Here is the assumption that most people carry without examining it. Saving money protects stability. That part is true, but stability is not wealth. Stability is the floor. Wealth is the structure built above it. When money is simply preserved, held tightly, kept inactive, protected from any form of deployment, it maintains its face value, but it gains nothing. It builds no momentum. It creates no leverage. This is what Solomon understood that most modern financial thinking quietly overlooks. There is a difference between inactive capital and commanded capital. Inactive capital sits, it waits, it preserves, it is safe, and in its safety it remains exactly where it is, neither growing nor building anything beyond its own maintained presence. Commanded capital is different. Commanded capital has been given a role. It has been assigned a purpose. It moves with intention. And because it moves with intention, it creates effects that passive accumulation never produces. The modern saver focuses almost entirely on protecting inactive capital. This is where the misunderstanding lives. Saving is not wrong. But saving without structure is simply accumulation, and accumulation without command is where financial power quietly dies. This is where ancient household wisdom becomes worth examining carefully. Disciplined families in the ancient world, families who built and maintained wealth across generations, rarely treated money as a single pool. They understood something practical and structural. When income enters a household without division, it naturally drifts toward consumption. Not because of weakness, not because of laziness. Because consumption is visible and immediate, while multiplication is slow and invisible. The bill in front of you demands attention. The asset you could have built in 10 years does not. So ancient stewards did something deliberate. They divided income before it could drift. The moment resources arrived, they were separated into purposeful portions, not arbitrarily, not based on desire or convenience, but according to a structure that had been decided in advance before the emotional weight of daily life could interfere. This practice had a principle at its center, and that principle carries a name worth stating clearly. The reserved capital law. The rule, stated simply, is this: every income must contain a portion that is permanently dedicated to multiplication, not to saving, not to security, not to convenience or comfort, to multiplication alone. This portion is protected from spending. It is separated from daily life. It is not negotiable, not flexible, not available for emergencies or desires. It exists for one purpose. And because it exists for one purpose, it slowly begins to do something that passive savings never can. The first structural layer of this principle is division. Money must be divided before it is spent. This is not a complex idea, but it is one that most people, in practical terms, never apply. The typical modern earner receives income and then makes decisions. He pays the bills that are due. He buys what is needed. He covers what is urgent. And whatever remains, if anything remains, becomes savings. Savings, in this model, is whatever the spending process left behind. This is why savings rarely grow into anything meaningful. They are the residue of consumption, not the product of structure. The reserved capital law inverts this. Division happens first, before a single bill is paid, before a single decision is made, before the noise of daily life can reach the capital and redirect it. A simple example makes this clear. A worker receives his monthly income. Before he addresses any expense, he divides that income into 3 broad categories. The first portion serves living, the costs required to maintain daily function, shelter, food, basic necessities. The second portion serves protection, stability reserves, managed carefully, designed to absorb unexpected disruption. The third portion serves multiplication. This is the reserved capital. It does not belong to daily life. It belongs to a different structure entirely. Notice what this does. It does not require a larger income. It does not require brilliance or advanced financial knowledge. It requires only one discipline: division before deployment. Even a modest income, structured this way, begins to behave differently than the same income managed without structure. This is not complexity. This is discipline expressed through architecture. Now consider what separates two people with similar incomes and similar levels of discipline. One measures his financial health by how much money remains unspent at the end of each month. His savings account grows slowly. He feels responsible. He feels careful. But when you examine his capital closely, almost all of it is passive. Almost none of it is assigned to any form of multiplication. It exists, protected, doing nothing beyond maintaining its own presence. The other person measures something different. He does not celebrate preserved money. He asks a different question: which portion of my capital is actively working? This is the identity that ancient wealth structures quietly cultivated. Not the accumulator, not the saver, the steward. The steward does not measure discipline by restraint alone. He measures it by assignment. Every portion of his capital has a role. Every role serves a purpose. Every purpose moves toward a long-term outcome. Wealth, in this framework, is not a behavior. It is an identity. And here is the quiet shock at the center of this idea. Disciplined families who have maintained financial power across generations rarely discuss their savings rates. They rarely compare account balances. They rarely measure themselves against the visible financial markers that most people use to gauge success. What they track, carefully and privately, is how much of their capital is multiplying. The saver and the steward can live in identical houses, drive similar vehicles, and appear financially indistinguishable from the outside. But inside their capital structures, something entirely different is happening. The saver's money is waiting. The steward's money is working. And over time, not months, but years and decades, that difference produces outcomes that no amount of disciplined saving can replicate. There is a deeper layer to the reserved capital law that has not yet been revealed. It involves not just how money is divided, but what happens to the multiplication portion once it is separated, because division alone is not enough. Many people divide their income with good intentions. They create categories. They assign portions. They build the structure, and then, slowly, under the pressure of desires and emergencies and quiet compromises, the multiplication portion disappears. Not all at once, in small amounts, with reasonable justifications. And when it disappears, so does everything it was meant to build. Solomon observed this too. The deeper mechanism, the part that separates temporary financial organization from lasting wealth structure, is about something more than discipline. It is about permanence. And that requires a different understanding of what the reserved capital portion actually is. There is a distinction that ancient stewards understood clearly, one that modern financial thinking has almost entirely lost. Not all money is the same, not because of its denomination, not because of where it came from or how much of it exists, but because of its assignment. When a portion of capital is designated for multiplication, it is no longer ordinary money. It has crossed a threshold. It has been given a permanent role. And the moment that role is treated as permanent, truly permanent, not merely intended, the behavior of that capital changes. This is the deeper layer of the reserved capital law. The multiplication portion must never be spent, not when emergencies arise, not when opportunities appear that feel urgent, not when discipline weakens under the pressure of a difficult month. This portion is not an emergency fund. Emergency funds serve a different role. They belong in the protection category, the stability reserve that absorbs unexpected disruption. The reserve capital exists for expansion alone. And the reason its permanence matters so deeply is not philosophical. It is structural. Capital that is consistently protected from consumption begins to accumulate a kind of quiet momentum. Not the dramatic momentum of risk or speculation. Something slower, steadier, and far more durable. Consider a simple illustration. A worker sets aside a modest portion of every income, not a dramatic percentage, but a consistent one, and protects it absolutely from the spending decisions of daily life. Month after month, that portion grows. Not because of any sophisticated strategy, simply because it is never touched. Over time, that reserved portion reaches a threshold where it can be deployed, placed into something that generates a return. That return is then divided according to the same structure. A portion of it lives, a portion protects, and a portion returns to multiplication. The cycle, once established, does not require heroic effort to maintain. It requires only one discipline: protecting the reserved portion at all costs. This is where most people fail, not because they lack intelligence or intention, because they have not yet decided that this portion is untouchable. They have organized their money without committing to its permanence. And without permanence, the structure collapses the moment pressure arrives. Pressure always arrives. This is not pessimism. It is simply an accurate observation about how financial life unfolds. Desires appear. Emergencies surface. Social expectations create quiet pressure to spend in ways that feel justified in the moment. And when those moments come, the undisciplined saver and the disciplined steward face the same temptation. The difference is not strength of character in any abstract sense. The difference is identity. When a person has internalized the steward identity, when he genuinely understands that the multiplication portion belongs to a different category of capital, he does not experience that portion as available money being withheld. He experiences it as capital that was never his to spend. This reframe is subtle, but it is where the psychological architecture of lasting wealth actually lives. Disciplined families who have maintained this structure across generations do not heroically resist temptation every month. They have simply decided, at a deep level, that certain capital exists in a different category than spending money. The saver resists spending. The steward does not resist. He simply does not consider certain capital as spending money at all. That distinction, small in description, enormous in practice, is what separates temporary financial organization from a wealth structure that compounds across time. Solomon's wisdom literature consistently returns to one theme that modern financial culture has almost entirely abandoned: patience as a structural requirement, not a virtue to admire from a distance. The reserved capital law does not produce results in weeks. It does not produce visible transformation in a single year. Its power is not designed for short observation windows. Ancient wealth thinking never measured success annually. It measured success generationally. This is deeply uncomfortable for the modern mind, which has been trained to expect visible progress within months and dramatic results within a few years. The hustle culture that surrounds modern financial conversation reinforces this expectation constantly: more income, more activity, faster results, bigger numbers, sooner. And here is the quiet truth that Solomon embedded in his observations. Constant financial activity often masks the absence of structure. The person who is always chasing the next income stream, always pursuing the next opportunity, always moving, this person is often doing so precisely because he has no reserved capital working quietly beneath the surface. He must keep moving because nothing is compounding without him. The steward moves differently. He is not passive. He is not idle. But his primary focus is not the relentless generation of new income. His primary focus is the protection and consistent deployment of reserved capital. Wealth, in the Solomon framework, grows quietly. It is not announced. It is not displayed. It does not require constant attention or dramatic activity. It requires structure, consistency, and time. These three things compounded together produce something that effort alone never can. This brings a necessary shift in how money itself is perceived. The typical modern relationship with money is transactional. Money arrives. Money is evaluated for what it can purchase or protect. Money is spent, saved, or invested based on how it feels to make those decisions in the moment. Even disciplined savers often carry this transactional relationship beneath their careful habits. They save because saving feels responsible. They accumulate because accumulation feels secure. But the feeling is the foundation, not the structure. When income arrives and is immediately divided according to a pre-decided structure, something changes. Money is no longer evaluated emotionally in the moment of its arrival. It is assigned. The living portion handles what living requires. The protection portion absorbs what uncertainty demands. The multiplication portion disappears into its permanent category before a single spending decision can reach it. Purchases, in this framework, are no longer evaluated only by affordability. They are evaluated by something more precise. Does this decision require me to disrupt my capital structure? If the answer is no, the purchase comes from the appropriate portion, the structure remains intact, and the decision is clean. If the answer is yes, the purchase requires drawing from reserved capital, then the price of that purchase is not its stated cost. Its true cost is everything that reserved capital would have built over the next decade. That reframe from affordability to structural disruption changes how every financial decision feels. Not dramatically, not with great emotional weight. Quietly, calmly, with the composed certainty of someone who understands what his capital is actually doing. The practical implementation of this structure is simpler than most people expect. It is not a sophisticated system. It does not require spreadsheets or financial software or any particular level of income. It requires a ritual. Every time income enters your life, whether from a salary, a transaction, a returned investment, or any other source, pause before any other action. Divide it immediately into its assigned portions. Do not wait until the end of the month to see what remains. Do not allow the living expenses to determine what multiplication receives. Division happens first. Always first. This ritual, repeated without exception, does something that discipline alone cannot. It removes the emotional negotiation from the process. When division is automatic, when it happens as a ritual at the moment of income arrival, there is no monthly decision about how much to save or invest. The structure is already decided. The portions are already assigned. The mind does not need to negotiate because the architecture has already answered the question. Ancient stewards understood that the most dangerous moment in financial life is the gap between income arriving and money being assigned. In that gap, consumption speaks loudly. The ritual closes the gap. Small, repeated actions reshape financial destiny, not through drama or discipline exerted under pressure, but through architecture that removes the pressure entirely. This is where most financial advice fails the disciplined person. It asks him to be strong in moments of temptation rather than building a structure that makes those moments irrelevant. The reserved capital law does not ask for strength. It asks for structure. And structure, once established and protected, does not require the same daily effort that willpower demands. There is one warning worth stating clearly before this examination closes. Impatience is the primary threat to every wealth structure ever built. Not market conditions. Not unexpected expenses. Not income volatility, impatience. The steward who has divided his capital correctly, protected his reserved portion faithfully, and established his structure with care, this person will at some point become uncomfortable with how slowly visible progress appears. He will look at his reserved capital and feel the temptation to do something dramatic with it, something faster, something that promises to compress the timeline. This is precisely the moment Solomon warned about. The one who withholds excessively falls into lack, but so does the one who grows impatient with structure and disrupts it chasing speed. Real capital structures are not exciting to observe in their early years. They are quiet, they appear modest. They do not produce visible transformation on a schedule that satisfies impatience. But beneath that quiet surface, momentum is building. Compound effects do not announce themselves as they accumulate. They arrive suddenly, after years of invisible progress, in ways that appear dramatic only to those who were not watching closely. The steward watches closely. He is not surprised by the results. He built them quietly, over time, through structure and patience and the consistent protection of reserved capital. Return now to where this examination began. Saving money is not wrong. Let that be clear. Saving protects stability. It builds the floor that prevents financial collapse. It is a necessary element of any disciplined approach to money. But Solomon observed something that generations of careful savers have quietly rediscovered in their most honest moments. Stability is not wealth. A disciplined saver can spend an entire lifetime building and protecting a floor, and never build anything above it. Wealth begins the moment money receives its purpose. Not when income increases. Not when circumstances improve. Not when some future condition finally makes structure possible. Now, with whatever income currently exists, through the simple, permanent act of dividing capital before it can drift and protecting one portion of that capital as permanently assigned to multiplication. This is what ancient stewards understood. This is what Solomon embedded in his observations about those who give and grow richer, and those who withhold and fall into lack. He was not describing generosity versus miserliness. He was describing structure versus stagnation. Capital that is given a role, commanded, assigned, purposefully deployed, behaves differently than capital that is simply held. It was true in the ancient world. It remains true now. Wealth follows structure, not effort. Stewardship always outperforms accumulation. And money without assignment will always drift toward consumption, no matter how disciplined the person holding it believes himself to be. The reserved capital law is not a formula. It is not a shortcut. It is a decision about identity. The saver asks, how much can I protect? The steward asks, how well is my capital assigned? One question leads to a floor. The other builds everything above it. If this changed how you think about money, consider watching The Ancient Rule of Divided Capital and subscribe for weekly wisdom from history's most disciplined wealth thinkers.